Hello filmmakers, welcome back to our series on how to produce a documentary film, and today we are digging into websites because it's a big part of pre-production and it's an important step that I think sometimes gets left till way too late in the process.
Yeah, I mean, even I've thought that. Why do we need a website so early in the process? Shouldn't that come at the end of the process?
Well, one of the biggest reasons that you'd get your website going all the way back in pre-production is because it takes ages. It can take a really long time to build a website.
Yeah, that's right. It can. Like the development time on even a simple website is often weeks and sometimes months. So you really need to allow for that and get started now. What are some of the key functions people should keep in mind about their website in that early phase?
Well, I think even before you get into the functions, I think you've got to be thinking about, as soon as you've got the title for your film, you need to claim that URL. You've got to, register the domain name, and you have to claim your social media places because they are essential to the marketing of your film. So that is the very, very first step. And then once you've got that, you can start looking at building your website. And that's going to also depend on, are you going to build it yourself, or do you need to hire a developer? Or are you going to outsource it to a third party in some way?
So these guys might benefit from understanding how you go about this process. What do you do when you need to get a new website up and running as quickly as possible?
First, it's that domain name registration, and then it's just coming up with what's often called a wireframe, which is basically like a blueprint where you just sit down and you work out, okay, I need a home page, I need a contact page, I need an about page. They would be the three that I would always start from, because once you've got that, you can kind of claim that real estate online and you can build out from there.
So how do you manage the issue of not yet having a trailer because you're not in production yet? Probably not yet having a poster because you haven't done your publicity stills. How do you brand up your project website without those components?
It's a good point. So you may not even have a logo, so to speak, but what you can do is, for the first iteration, is just kind of settle on the fonts and colours that you think are most appropriate for your project, and just start with that, because everything to do with websites can be updated later on. But if you've got a graphic designer, they should be able to work with you to create what's called a brand guide, and that brand guide is going to define the fonts, the colours, the overall look and feel for your website.
Yeah, and I think this is where it's really helpful if during this pre-production phase you've actually started capturing some materials. Even if it's some video materials or some photos that you've taken out in the field, it might actually be really helpful in starting to define a bit of a personality around your field at this embryonic stage on your website.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe you don't have the trailer or the poster till way down into production, but you can still use, video headers from some of the shoots you've done. Some of them might look really nice for just, 10-second grabs that look really good on the page and keep it more dynamic.
So then the other part of it is really, what is the website designed to do in this early phase?
So I think in the very first phase of the website, what you're really trying to do is just claim that real estate, claim that title, and have somewhere where your social media platforms can all link to. And then you're probably trying to build a mailing list, especially if you're going to do any kind of self-distribution. So you can start capturing people's names and email so that you can communicate back to them as the project progresses. And then you can also start building out your social media platforms, and you just kind of sensitising the audience to your project and what's going to be coming up downstream.
Yeah, and the more effort you put into that audience building, the more successful you'll be when you come to release. There's going to be more people that watch and buy your film, which is what you're trying to achieve at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely, because your audience become one of your biggest marketers. So the sooner you can get them engaged with your project, the better.
That's right. And then you're going to drip feed them content of all different types through social and the website, and you're going to build on it over time. So how do you build this website? Like, what platform would you recommend people use?
Look, I think there's a lot of different platforms. We tend to use WordPress because we know it and we understand it, and it's very functional, very easy for people who aren't familiar with building websites. There's so many tutorials, and it's quite easy to get in there and learn how to do it yourself. Once you've got the sort of nuts and bolts set up, you can do it yourself. And I mean, there's so many different things. There's Squares, there's all kinds of different websites that you can build from. So just go with the one that you're most familiar with. But my only recommendation with that is really just make sure that you build it in a way that you can update it yourself, that doesn't rely on having to pay a graphic designer or a web developer every time you want to change the tiniest thing. You want to have that ownership over it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And, you know, WordPress has got like gazillions of great themes to make your website look good that cost you next to nothing. So I would recommend that. I would just add one more thing, which is really the fundamentals of building a website. Realizing that, like me, you guys probably aren't expert in web development, but a couple of things I've learned over the years are there are two critical things that you just have to do when you're building a website. The first thing is you've got to check the speed, and if it's not running fast, you have to get it running fast, because slow websites, they just do not find audiences. So there are lots of tests you can do to check your site speed. We use one called GT Metrics, which is free, which will give you recommendations on how to speed up your site. And you really need to go to the lengths to make sure your site is optimized in a way that it's getting an A, a green A, on a speed test, because otherwise your audience are just not going to stick it out and wait for it to load. And the second fundamental, I think, is your search engine optimization, SEO, making sure you've got a good plugin on your website. We use Yoast Premium, and it just really helps you make sure that your site is visible when it's searched for, which of course is the real purpose. Going back in time, I think we really over-focused on the aesthetics. Of course, they're really important, but some of these fundamentals actually are what really count in terms of building audience, don't you think?
Yes, I do, but I don't think they're more or less important than other things. Like I actually think the look of your site's really important. You don't want it really cluttered. You don't want it to have so much information, so much text that people just zone out and move away. You want to have, you know, your big bold headings, minimal paragraph text, really simple language, and just don't over clutter it with imagery. Just keep it really simple and really clean. And then you've got to think about user navigation, and this is something I think that sometimes gets overlooked. What's the user flow? So if someone lands on your homepage, what do you want them to do? And is there a really clear button, call to action, to get them to take that action? Those are the kinds of things you really need to be thinking about with the user experience on your site. And the other thing that I don't think we touched on is actually we're in a mobile phone world.
Yep.
And your site's got to look good on mobile. Probably more important than it looking good on desktop is that it all looks good on a mobile phone. And so there's different settings within most websites so that it can be adapted for mobile or desktop. So you've just got to really be careful that, you know, whoever's designing it, if it's not you, is really doing that, taking that step.
Oh, you guys can see there is so much to this, and it is like a black hole for your time, and it will just suck so much of your time. So trying to come up with some parameters about, you know, how ambitious you're being with your website is really important, how much time you're willing to spend on it. Not completely trusting your graphic designer or web designer. I've been there so many times with so many different web and graphic designers where they don't do the hidden things that are so important to making your website functional and accessible to as many people. So I think that's a really critical part of it. Have fun with it as much as you can, but try and limit the amount of time that it's going to suck. But get going on it at this point in pre-production.
Yeah, absolutely. So the smaller your site is, meaning the least amount of pages, the easier it's going to be to manage and the easier it's going to be to get people using the site, and really think about what it is you want people doing. Is it to subscribe to your newsletter? Is it to link through to the videos that you've already put up on YouTube? Is it to sign up to host a screening? You know, what are the key things you want people doing when they get to your website?
Yeah, sadly we're in a world of hackers and websites to get hacked all the time. As we have more and more websites, and I think we've got dozens of them now, it's, you know, it blows my mind, even with all of the security measures we've put in place at the server side, in the website build itself, how often they get hacked. So it's absolutely critical if you're using platforms like WordPress that you're updating them regularly and using things that keep your site as secure as possible for both yourself and your users.
Only thing I would add is that you do need a website, even if it's just a landing page. You should keep it as simple as you can and just make sure it reflects your film in the best possible way. And it's really a home for all the information that you're creating for your film. So it's great for marketing. And if you're going to self-distribute your film, having your own website's really important.
Wait, why can't I just do it on social media? Why can't I just have a social media page to do this?
Well, you don't own social media, so you could spend hours and hours creating a brilliant Facebook page with, you know, hundreds of people, etc., have liked it, and then Facebook, for whatever reason, turns it off, and you've lost all of it. You have nothing. You have no ownership, no control over it. So that's the main reason I wouldn't. If you don't need a website because your film is purely going to a distributor and they will create the website for you, that's awesome. But it's often not the case.
No, that's right. And I think there are some potential pitfalls with that. I would argue that it helps you a lot once you get to releasing your film to have your own URL and your own website. That looks far more professional than pointing people to a social media page. I think it adds a level of credibility and professionalism to it, and has this huge benefit of allowing you to build your audience ahead of release.
So there you have it. Like that's just a, you know, very big overview of what a website is and how it can work for you for your film. But if you have questions, please just reach out, direct message us. You can find that on our website, which is moonshinecommunicationsacademy.com. Contact us there, ask any questions that you have. And there's also a resource tab in the website, so you might find some great information there. Otherwise, we will be back next week with more on how to develop and produce your documentary film.